Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and this is part 3 of our Blood Moon, or Blue Moon series. And this week, we're going to answer the question everyone's been waiting for all week. Is Basic Mountain the worst land in the deck? Yes, it is, but more on that later. Okay, what you really want to know is this dollar rare that nobody ever uses. Was it good? So, tournament report. Tuesday was 3 rounds. We had 9 players. There would have been a fourth round, but I screwed it up as I usually do. So, round 1, I played against a Grixis control. It was just a basic Grixis control, basically Grixis Delver without the Delvers. So, game 1, I resolved a lone Revenant with a Spell Snare backup, and he didn't even have any counters. He never drew counters this game, and so he could never deal with the lone Revenant at all. So after that, I'm like, well, let's just throw this Keranos out here. And things did not go well for him. Game 2, turn 1, he used Serum Visions and put both to the top. So I ended up using Surgical Extraction on the Serum Visions just to kind of get a peek at his hand. So he had one more land. He scryed one more to the top. He had the basic Swamp, I believe, in his hand. And he had a Steam Vents down. And yeah, he wasn't too happy about not having the land. He did end up getting a third land, but he had a lot of blue stuff in his hand, and his third land, I think, was like a Blood Crypt. So, Blood Moon cut him off from blue completely. And from there, I just had to deal with his Tassiger, which Roast took care of that, so handy sideboard tech there. Yeah. And, let's see, my other notes. Yeah, he didn't have blue for the rest of the game, so then Lone Revenant came in again, couldn't deal with him, couldn't counter him, and just kind of rode him to victory, maintaining the card advantage and card flow from him. Hexproof Impulse on a stick, pretty good. Round 2 against Elves. I thought I'd be okay against Elves. It's a creature deck. I lost both games. Game 1, I couldn't find an Anger of the Gods or a Cryptic. I mean, I took care of his lords and that, but he had an onslaught of 1/1 mana dorks. And yeah, I resolved a Keranos, but then couldn't find a Anger or a Cryptic off of it. At one point I fetched, and like 2 of my next 3 cards would have been Anger of the Gods. It was not fun. Game 2, he got some early guys down. I played Anger of the Gods, and then my opponent resolved Choke. And look at this mana base. It's 10 islands, 2 Steam Vents, and only 2 things that can actually tap for blue that aren't islands. That did not go well, especially when I didn't have any of the Sulfur Falls. We play another game for fun after that, and basically the same thing happened. So Choke is really, really bad for this deck. Round 3, I played against a Abzan, sort of just like value creatures. He had some exiling stuff going on with like Oblivion Ring, Path to Exile, and Fiend Hunter. He had Collected Company in there. He had Kitchen Finks. He had Wasteland Strangler, Wall of Omens, just stuff like that. And so games 1 and 2, Blood Moon hurt him both games. He was never able to get much going between all my removal and counter spells. Torrential Gearhulk and Burn pushed through damage both games. Funny story about this involving Blood Moon. I think it was game 1 where I got the Blood Moon out, and he has his basic plane, so he's able to Oblivion Ring it. I draw another Blood Moon, like right after he does that. So I play the other Blood Moon. Many turns go by, and then eventually he does this processor thing with Wasteland Strangler, gives something -3/-3 to get my Blood Moon off of his Oblivion Ring. Then he blinks his Oblivion Ring with Flicker Wisp and targets my because he did find a second Plains. I think he pathed his own Wall of Omens at some point to do that. And so he blinked his Oblivion Ring, exiled my Blood Moon. I top deck another Blood Moon literally right after that. He wasn't amused, but I was. So yeah, I won that, and because I ended up winning that round, that meant that there was only one undefeated person, so our Tuesday night ended at 3 rounds. The Tuesday night kind of does that. Sometimes it depends on the number of people and depends on, if they have an undefeated person by the end of the third round. And since I was down a match and I got paired up, I ended up being the one to screw up everything. Yay. Friday Night Magic, I ran the same list as I've been doing. Round 1, I went against Merfolk. Both games 1 and 2, he kind of fizzled out after his first few guys. Never really got much after that. Never found a Master of Waves in either game. I think the lowest he got me was like 9 in one game and like 13 in another. It was not very good for him. So I ended up winning that handily. Round 2, I played against a Grixis Control with main deck Spreading Seas. Game 1, he had like 4 non-basics, and I think they were all tapped for some reason on my turn, so I resolved a Blood Moon. And then I used Cryptic Command on his Chandra Flamecaller. And that was all there was to that game. Game 2 went kind of back and forth for a bit. He was able to play around the Blood Moon. He was able to get the Blood Moon off the field later on with Engineered Explosives. But ultimately, I wasn't able to resolve a Lightning Bolt. I had 7 lands and Lightning Bolt. I had Lone Revenant on the field because I got that out there, and he just couldn't deal with that. But I was at like 3 life. I used Surgical to look at what else was in his hand. He had... well, first I tried to bolt him because he was at 3 life, and he dispelled it, so I responded by, using Surgical to look at his hand. My hand, I had 2 Torrential Gearhulks and a Cryptic Command. Of course, no matter what I do, I can only cast one of them. And I had a Spell Snare. He had Spell Snare and Logic Knot in his hand, and I just could not get around the Logic Knot. I wasn't going to be able to resolve anything around that or stop the Dispel. So, and then he untapped and attacked me with his Creeping Tar Pit, so it's not like leaving Lone Revenant back to block would have done anything. Game 3, he was kind of land short. His first 2 lands were Island, Desolate Lighthouse, and so I used a couple Mana Leaks on a couple of his Serum Visions. Not entirely sure if that was the best call. He did eventually get more lands, including a basic Swamp. I got the Blood Moon out, and he played Engineered Explosives for 3, leaving up 2 things that were basically mountains in order to do that. One of them was a Steam Vents, but of course this gave me the opportunity to resolve Lone Revenant, because he would have to pop the Blood Moon, or pop his Engineered Explosives to get my Blood Moon off the field, so he could have counter magic, but doing that he taps his lands out, and so he's not going to counter the Lone Revenant either way. So he resolves, and I just kind of ride him to victory, because I was at like 17 life still, so my life total was not in danger as much this time. Got a second Revenant on the final turn and had 2 bolts in hand, and he was at like 5 life, so yeah, he was not going to stop all of that. Round 3 was Abzan Midrange, a rematch from last week. Game 1, I kept a 1-land hand with Serum Vision, Spell Snare, Mana Leak, and 2 Blood Moons. He Inquisitions on turn 1, and he hates my entire hand. He ends up taking the Serum Visions, trying to hopefully stall me on land so I don't get the Blood Moon. and I top deck nothing but lands. And so I get the turn 3 Blood Moon out, giving him all mountains. He also took away my mana leak on the second turn, so he was able to resolve an Anafenza the Foremost. I got the Blood Moon down, he had all non-basics. He never cast anything for the rest of the game. I was able to make all of my land drops and finally get a Torrential Gearhulk out to block his Anafenza while I was still at 6 life. And then I just kind of ride the Gearhulk to victory because he can't cast anything. Game 2, he resolves a Liliana of the Veil, but I was able to get a Blood Moon down, cutting him off from green. Actually, his mana at that point was Basic Swamp, Basic Plains, and Godless Shrine. And then I get a Keranos just before his Liliana ultimate, and he decides to split my lands and then the Moon and Keranos into 2 different piles. I decide to keep the Moon and Keranos. He never casts another card, and I eventually get my lands back and just kill him with Keranos and Lightning Bolt. I like this thing too. Yeah, Lone Revenant and Keranos really did patch up the finisher issues I was having, and so they're gonna stick around. Round 4, Bant Eldrazi. Game 1, he's on the play. He gets turn 1 Basic Forest, uses Ancient Stirrings, and gets Talisman of Dominance. For those who don't know what that is, let me fail to find it. Maybe if I search Dominance. Oh, it's because I have this. Yeah, that shouldn't be checked. I'll get this right yet. So basically, it's a 2-mana artifact, and of course, it's going to give him his colorless, not dominance, Talisman of Progress. It's going to give him his colorless, his white, and his blue, and he's got Basic Forest for green, and I did not have a spell snare for this. So he gets that resolved, and Blood Moon is pretty much completely worthless now. He ends up getting 2 Thought-Knot Seers out, really stripping my hand. I play Serum Vision, stacking both Electrolyze and Anger of the Gods to the top, because I can just play the Electrolyze next turn, draw the Anger of the Gods off of it, and take out both of his Thought-Knot Seers. He drops the 3rd Thought-Knot Seer. So fortunately, those cards being on the top of my deck are both safe. He sees 2 lands and attacks me down to 8 life. Then I kill 2 of his Thought-Knot Seers, draw 2 cards off of it, including a Torrential Gearhulk. He drops a Reality Smasher and attacks me for 9. So yeah, that's how that went. If it wasn't for the haste on that Smasher, or I just needed him to have 1 turn somewhere in there where he wasn't, dropping big beefy Eldrazi. Game 2, I kind of got run over by Smashers again. It was very much like Game 1. I think he had Negate for my Blood Moon too. So yeah, that wasn't as good. Mardu Planeswalkers, Mardu Planeswalker Control. I've been seeing this a lot. They're like 3 to 4 different people have this kind of Mardu deck, and they've been doing fairly well with it. Game 1 and 2 is very much the same thing. Tons of Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions takes away my counters, and then he resolves Planeswalkers, whether it's either version of Liliana or Nahiri, or I don't think the Gideon Jura resolved, but I wasn't having a good time with all that. And then he also had Lingering Souls going, so that kind of hurt, sort of sideboard plans and such, because I don't know if I'm supposed to take out the Anger of the Gods for that, but it does nothing to the Planeswalkers, so I had a lot of cards that were going to be situational against him, and his hand disruption just made it so he could play around whatever he left me with. Wasn't very good for me. Ended up losing both games there. So I ended up in 6th place Friday night out of 22 people. And so I'm still enjoying the deck. I enjoy the finishers. I don't think there's a reason to change them. Things to change. Worst land in the deck is basic mountain. If I want to play around choke in this, there's a couple options. I can add more Sulphur Falls or Spire Bluff Canals, and so get some non-island blue sources. That would help. The issue with that is I don't want to cut too deep into my basics or my fetches, because that's going to hurt me when in all the other matchups where I'm trying to play Blood Moon. But basic mountain, I can't search for it. I don't have Scalding Tarns, so I'm just using blue fetches, so I can't search for it. It's never going to tap for blue mana whether there's a Blood Moon out or not, so it really is the worst land in this deck. So I'm going to swap that out for a Spire Bluff Canal. It should probably be a Sulphur Falls, but I'm going to go with what I own currently. I might pick up a couple more Sulphur Falls, but where would I put them? Maybe in place of one of the basic islands and one of the fetches, and go for Sulphur Falls and one Spire Bluff Canal. Would that be good enough to play around the choke? Maybe. Would it be worth it in terms of other matches? Because there's a lot of times where I'm dropping Blood Moon on turn 3, which means I have one of these red sources that's going to turn into just a red source and no longer be able to tap for blue, and have 2 basic islands. And then I still need to find a 3rd basic island to play the Cryptic. Sometimes I already have it in hand, but if I'm going to swap out basic and just even one basic island, there could be times where that basic island becomes something, a Sulphur Falls, that doesn't help me cast Cryptic Command under Blood Moon. So that's something I have to be mindful of. So I'm not sure if it's really worth it to do that. Maybe just because of how this mana base is with its island sources, that maybe just a Resolve Choke is something this deck just will not be able to beat ever. And maybe I should just accept that. The other option is to run some Annuls in the sideboard, a nice 1 mana counter spell, counters an artifact or enchantment. Seems kind of narrow since I'm really only putting this in here to deal with that. I mean, yeah, it's good against Affinity as well, maybe a couple other random things, but not necessarily the type of thing I want to put a narrow sideboard card on. I've got a lot of narrow stuff in here. That's one of the things I'm finding with this deck, is there's a lot of stuff here, but a lot of it is narrow, or it has like a certain window of time where it's going to be good against what my opponent's playing. You know, whether it's Spell Snare, or Is It Charm, or Mana Leak, or Angers, or even Blood Moons, and Electrolyze. They can all become situationally good, but I think this deck works because it's consistent with what it does, and a lot of these cards are situationally good enough of the time where this deck can really punish your opponent, as I've been seeing. So still going to keep it blue-red, mainly because I still can't wrap my mind around getting 3 basic islands, another basic for the other color, and then I'd still need something that taps for red so I can cast the Blood Moon. So that would be essentially 5 lands, or if I'm doing it when I have 2 basic islands out, still 4 lands before I cast a Blood Moon. But a lot of times where I want to be jamming the Blood Moon, I want to be doing that on turn 3 whenever possible. So I just don't see that happening. Sideboard. I'm really not impressed with the Surgical Extraction. I'm really not. I thought I would be, but it's been awkward to side in. It hasn't been super good even in the matchups where I've been drawing it. Wormcoil Engine. I never really got to use this guy. I sided him in several times just because, like, against Merfolk, I always side out my mana leaks and remands, and so I had another card that I needed to side in, so why not Worm Coil was essentially that. Roast, the one time I actually drew it, um, I killed a Tasker with it, so I was happy. It did what it was supposed to do. Uh, so yeah, those are probably going to stay. I am going to change a few things, though. Let's go to our changes. I've been rambling enough on all of this. Okay, so all this rambling, and I've changed a total of 4 cards in the deck. I took out the basic mountain because there's really no reason not to, since I don't have Scalding Tarns, and I threw in a Spire Bluff Canal. We'll see if that makes things better or not. I don't think it'll be too much of a change. It can help me get more blue sources or red sources before I drop Blood Moon, so that's got that going for it. In the sideboard, I took out the Worm Coil engine. I still don't feel that it was, that it would have been a difference maker in any of the games that I've been losing. I put in a Chandra Flamecaller myself in my board. We'll see how this goes. I don't like losing to Planeswalkers. So this is kind of like an anti-Planeswalker, kind of like a big damage push. Against aggro decks, it can be another sweeper. It can be another answer to Lingering Souls, all in the same card. And it can cycle a bunch of dead stuff out of my hand and get me to more relevant cards as well. So just an overall sort of value card. We'll see how it goes. It might even make its way into the main deck. I'm not sure where, though. Maybe in play as a Keranos, maybe not. I don't know. I like the Keranos and Lone Revenant combination, and the Gearhulks have been amazing. So there's that. The other card I changed was in the main deck. I actually took out another Remand. It's still the card, the 2-mana counter I'm least impressed by. As much as I like the idea of a 4th Cryptic or even moving a Counterflux to the main, I still want to maintain a good number of 2-mana counters, but I want a 2-mana counter that's going to be good later in the game. And I'm turning to Logic Knot. This is a card I haven't used since the original Drago Esper deck that I had, that I started this entire series with. But here I've got, you remember all the problems I talked about with it. But here I have 8 fetch lands, and I have a ton of 1-mana cards, and a really easy way to get double blue. I'm only 2 colors, so I don't need to worry about dropping a bunch of non-blue sources in the early turns, especially since I just got rid of the basic mountain. So I have one non-blue source in the deck, essentially. So shouldn't have too many problems getting this to be usable on turn 2, but it can also be usable in the late game, whereas, remanding my opponent's Nahiri, yeah, that's good for that turn, but then I still have to find something to actually counter it with, and this is something that can actually counter it. So, yeah, we'll run it back this way, and, all those other ideas. Oh, Cyclonic Rift. Speaking of answering Planeswalkers, yeah, I want to try this out too in place of the Surgical. Just another answer to any sort of permanent. Maybe get to overload it and just kind of be a nice reset to the board. I don't know how well that's going to work out, but it's another thing I can do against Planeswalkers that have hit the field, or just anything that's hit the field that I don't want. So those are the 4 changes I have made. As far as like a bunch of the other stuff that I've talked about, whether changing the mana base to snow-covered lands and going for Screds for removal, or some of the other finishers like the Metallurgic Summonings or Batterskull, things like that, or going with main deck Engineered Explosives and tossing in a Academy Ruins. Here it is, right here. I don't feel like any of that would make a difference in the matchups I'm having a difficult time with. I don't feel like that would take the deck from being, where it is to the next level. And I don't feel that. Ultimately I feel that those changes would just be a different means of accomplishing the same thing. Maybe it'd be better, slightly better in those matchups, are slightly worse off overall. But I was very happy with the Lone Revenant and Keranos additions to the deck. I don't have a good reason to take those out at this point. Lone Revenant was especially difficult for my opponents to deal with. Get him resolved against control deck. They have to keep something like Supreme Verdict in their deck in order to deal with it. And get Keranos resolved, and there's not much that's going to exile him. Maybe Nahiri's, but that's another story. And Torrential Gearhulk has been super good, so I don't want to do the Madcap Experiment Platinum Empyrean thing while I'm running Gearhulks, and I don't want to not be running Gearhulks. And once again, I don't feel that Platinum Empyrean would answer any of the issues that I'm having troubles with. So we're going to try it this way, and we might, depending on how things go, we might be approaching the end of this Blood Moon series. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty good about this deck list. It's pretty consistent in what it's doing. It's it's fun to play if you like playing control. I think all of my opponents, when I played Lone Revenant, had to read this card this week, so that was fun. I enjoy the little things like that. So this will be the list that I play next week. We're going to be seeing how well the Logic Knot does, and especially the Chandra out of the sideboard will be the main, and the Cyclonic Rift out of the sideboard. Those will be the main things that I keep my eye on this week. Another thing I'm still considering, I don't know, maybe dropping one of the Electrolyzes and bringing the Chandra up to the main deck, or dropping a Lone Revenant for the Chandra. So those are other options to consider, or even an Anger of the Gods. So those are things I can consider. In fact, dropping an Anger in place that might actually be not a bad idea, because it's still, it's an expensive board wipe, but it could still be a board wipe. And then in matches where Anger is dead, I'd rather be drawing a Chandra instead of a second Anger. So that's things to consider.